Okay, last quick check. Can everyone hear me?
I can.
All right, and everyone sees the slides.
Yes.
Loud and clear,
Okay,
side by side.
excellent. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to give this presentation to you folks. My name is Andy Stewart. My call sign Kilo Bravo 1, Oscar, India, Quebec. And I live in Westford, Massachusetts, about 25 miles northwest of Boston. And I'm happy to give you this presentation about Linux in your ham shack. And just so that people have some idea of who I am, I've been in the hobby since '07, and I earned my extra class license a couple of years later. I was the president of the local ham radio club for about 10 years and vice president for a couple of years around that. I did some work with the ARRL section here in Eastern Massachusetts. Back in 1997, I founded the Worcester Linux Users Group when I was living in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I haven't participated in that group for some time, but they're still going quite strongly, last I knew. And when I moved up to the Chelmsford, Massachusetts area right next door, I started a Linux meetup group. And I've been running that. I ran that until just before COVID started, and we've not gotten back together since, mostly because I didn't get off the dime. I also had occasion to teach Linux courses at the evening adult education program, and I did that for many years to the joy of lots of people who took the class. I've been using Linux since 1997, and by day, I'm a computer engineer. I build computer simulations to test digital logic circuits, and in short, I get paid to break things, and I have a lot of fun doing that. So my more recent interests, and my interests vary. There's so many things to do in this hobby, it's hard to be bored. More recently, I've been interested in antique radios and specifically the electrical restoration thereof, especially late 1930s, early 1940s. And I've done about a half a dozen of them successfully, and I find it rather relaxing to get in there with something that I actually have room to solder, as opposed to surface mount, which is quite challenging. I do a lot of home brewing, both making things on pine boards and soldering together commercially available kits. I have a lot of fun with all of that. And last winter, I built myself a 1920s style regenerative receiver with pluggable coils for different frequency ranges. I found the schematic online, I implemented it, and it works pretty well. I have fun with that. FT8 and Grid Tracker, I've had fun playing with that, but now that the bands are getting better, I'd like to get more into phone and CW. I enjoy fox hunting, both hiding the fox and looking for it. And of course, I enjoy spending time creating Andy's Ham Radio Linux and tweaking it and putting it out there for everyone to use and hopefully enjoy. So what are my goals here? Well, my goals in part are to promote Linux, which of course is a free and open source operating system that's out there that is an alternative to Microsoft Windows and Mac OS. And it can be freely downloaded and used by anybody. You can modify the code if you wish. You can get the source code. You can configure it to your heart's content. And it runs on the version I have runs on x86 64 machines. I don't do the 32-bit version anymore because nobody was downloading it. And I do this to give back to both the ham radio communities and the Linux communities from whom I've gotten so much Elmering and tutelage and so forth. And so this is my way of giving back to those communities. But I didn't want to build it from scratch. That's an awful lot of work. So what I decided to do is build this on top of an existing Linux collection of software, otherwise known as a distribution. And I chose the Ubuntu distribution because it's one with which I'm very familiar. And so I wanted to create a software collection containing as much ham radio software as possible, all of it being free and open source software, nothing proprietary at all. And my goal was everything just works. Now that's a pretty big goal with any computer these days, but my focus was that you would spend time using the computer and enjoying the radio. I don't think any of us need yet another computer to babysit and fuss with and swear at and so forth. So my hope is that everything just works. And I've tried really hard to make that happen. And so focus on the radio hobby where the computer is a tool to assist that, not the other way around. So the idea of Andy's Ham Radio Linux began that way. And you can tell I'm an engineer, not a marketing type by its name, but that name has stuck. And sometimes you might hear me refer to it as AHRL for short. So Andy's Ham Radio Linux, what is it? Well, I have version 25 that I just put out there about 6 weeks ago. It's got about 2,700 downloads as we speak, and it's based on Xubuntu version 22.04. Now, when I say remastered, what I mean is I took the Ubuntu software collection, I deleted some software packages that I didn't think were necessary, and I added software packages that were related to ham radio. And in some packages, some cases, the packages were available as part of the Ubuntu repository. And in other cases, I had to build it directly from source and install it so that you wouldn't have to go through that. Some people know how to do it, some people don't. And occasionally it's rather painful. And so I wanted to take all of that pain away from you. And so that when you click the menu, the application just comes up and it just works. That's the goal. So when I did all of this, I created a single ISO file, which is just under 4 gigabytes in size, and it can be downloaded from the SourceForge website. You can search for Andy's Ham Radio Linux or search for my call sign, KB1OIQ, and you'll find it. And as I said before, everything on there is covered by the GNU General Public License or a similar free software license. No proprietary software for two reasons. One, if it's proprietary, I can't legally redistribute it. And two, I'm rather anti-proprietary. So I like the free software and the open source mindset. So how would one get started if one wanted to do this? Well, many people start with maybe a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old laptop that isn't doing anything else. That's one way to go about it. Or if you have an older computer of some sort, you could try it there. It is possible to install this side by side with Windows, but most people I know just dedicate the entire computer to Linux and go that way. So go to SourceForge, download the version 25 ISO file, and then if you want to, boot it in VirtualBox and try it and see if it's to your liking. And if it is, then you could install it on the computer of your choice. Create a bootable USB thumb drive, put it in, make sure your BIOS is pointing to it, and then go ahead and install it. Now, there's some detailed instructions in a document that I've created called Getting Started, and it's right there on the page where you can see other documents and the ISO file itself. Please be sure to download that version. If it's not dated July or August in the year 2022, then you've got an old version. Please get that document and please read it. 99% of the problems that people report are because they didn't follow those instructions. So please be sure to follow those. There's not many, but they're important. So the target computer, as I said a little bit before, any x86 64 computer, probably 10 years old or less, will work. If you try to do it with older computers, you'll run into issues like, will it understand a 4 gigabyte or 8 gigabyte thumb drive? Some of the really old computers didn't for a while. So make sure that you have a computer of reasonable vintage. I would say 2 to 4 gigabytes of memory is an absolute minimum. And these days, most computers have much more than that. The disk space after installation, it needs about 15 gigabytes of disk space, although users have reported to me that if they tried to install it on a disk smaller than 64 gigabytes, the installer complained. I'm not sure why, but that was reported to me by 1 or 2 users. But these days, a 64 gigabyte hard drive is easy to accommodate. The processor speed generally isn't an issue because most ham radio programs are not compute intensive. Some SDR applications might be, especially if you're trying to decode an FM broadcast stereo station or something like that. But for the most part, processor speed is not an issue. You do want to have a working network on the computer because sometimes during installation, it will try to download files that it needs. And USB is required. And I said, or DVD. Some of the really old computers have DVD, and you can indeed install it that way, although admittedly, I haven't done that for years, but it used to work just fine. So if you followed all those instructions and if you were successful in making the thumb drive and booting the thumb drive directly, you'll end up with a screen that looks like what you see on the slide. Now, everything there is fully customizable once you learn how to do that. And just like when you looked at your very first HF radio, you saw all these buttons and knobs and displays and so forth. It was probably somewhat intimidating. But as you gradually went through it, you learned what those knobs and buttons were for, when to use them, and so forth. And people starting out with Linux, it's the same thing. Most of us have forgotten because we're used to Windows or Mac and we're past that learning curve. And some of us will have to go through that again if they try Linux. But it's really quite easy and mostly intuitive if you're used to those other operating systems. So if you wish to customize the background or change the panel at the bottom with applications of interest, all of those things are possible. And the menu is that little circle in the top left-hand corner. If you click that, you'll get a menu. And not only can you access the ham radio programs and other programs that are on here, you can get at the menu that lets you shut down or suspend the computer or lock the screen and so forth. Notice the third icon down on the left says install Xubuntu Linux. Now it's Xubuntu because it's using the XFCE desktop environment, and that's a slight difference from other flavors of Ubuntu which use different windowing environments. So when the time comes, double click that install icon and it will take you through the installation procedure with some questions that are pretty obvious, like what is your time zone and what account do you want and so forth. When it talks to you about partitioning the disk, if you're on a machine that you want to dedicate to Linux, just pick the thing that says erase the whole disk and install Linux and let it do what it wants to do. But if you're familiar with Linux and want to do some custom partitioning, the installer supports that, and you can do that at that time. So I don't know if I mentioned that, please read the Getting Started document. I wouldn't have taken the time to write it if I didn't think it was important, and you'll definitely save yourself some headaches if you do that. So please take a look at that document. So the one wart with the installation that I'm aware of is that the Ubuntu installer, for reasons unknown to me, fails to create the account that you asked it to create. Now, for Ubuntu, it works fine. For me, it does not, and I don't know why. So I documented in the Getting Started guide a procedure to make sure that your account is in there and associated with the correct groups to allow you to do everything you want to do. You just have to run a very short script in a terminal window, and Getting Started talks about how to do that. You do it once and then reboot after the installation, and everything should be just fine after that if you follow the instructions. And you'll know you did it right because the login box will appear, and whatever account name you created, your name will be there where my name is listed as Andy. If your name is listed there, you've done it correctly and you're probably okay. So use your password and log in. Now, here's an expanded view of the menu. So I clicked that round circle in the top left corner, and you can see there's accessories and development and so on and so forth on the right-hand side. And I've highlighted a menu that I added called Andy's Ham Radio Linux. And I organized things by my notion of organized. So for example, if you were to click the ham radio menu, you'd see a whole bunch of programs, but they're all listed in one menu. Some ham radio programs are listed in the internet menu or even the multimedia menu. And that didn't make sense to me. So I said, well, I'll leave that alone and I'll create the Andy's Ham Radio Linux menu and organize things my way. And you can see where there's a menu for antenna related software, Morse code, digital modes, etc. And if you don't like that organization, you can go in and customize this to your heart's content and make it the way you would like it to be. So for the background screen, if you right click on the background, you'll get a menu that lets you bring up this desktop customization window. And I've put a whole bunch of menu or backgrounds in there for you that were covered under free or Creative Commons licenses. So it is legal to redistribute these as far as I know. And there are 9 choices you can see there. And if you scroll down further, there are many others. So if you don't like the menu, the background that's there, you can pick another one or download your favorite background and use it as well. So some of the programs are command line based, but most of them are GUI based. That's graphical user interface. And some of them have a documentation that's available via a terminal window via command line. And to make it easier for you to get at those, you can see where the menu on the left says command line docs. And if you click those, you would get an appropriate window popping up showing you the documentation for those various tools. Most of the documentation, however, is available on the website of the people who wrote the application, and that's typically your standard HTML kind of thing. And I would encourage you to go there because that will always be the latest and greatest documentation available. Other pieces of documentation that I put on there, if you see on the left, it says documentation and command line docs. And if you go down further, there's a gray nondescript box that says Andy's Ham Radio Linux, Dire Wolf docs, other ham radio docs, and W1HKJ docs, which is FL, Digi, and all of those. So whatever documentation I could find, I put in there. But of course, I couldn't possibly put everything in there. But those are ones that I hope help get you started if you need it. So if you click on a couple of those, Firefox will start up automatically and show you a list of possible files to view. And so you can see here where I got myself into the Andy Ham Radio Linux documentation directory. And you can see where there's a listing of the sources, the changes that were made to the previous rev versus this one. The getting started guide is put there for your convenience. Some how-to guides and so on and so forth. And so those how-to guides I wrote based on my experience of how to get different things running, and I hope that they're helpful to you. So I put them in here. So I'm not gonna go through every item in every menu, but I've opened up the menu and taken screenshots for you, and I'm probably going to pick one or two items in each menu to talk about. Now, since I don't run Windows or Mac, if someone says to me, "How does your program compare to N1MM?" Well, honestly, I can't tell you because I've never run N1MM before. So I can't answer those sorts of questions. But what I can tell you is what's available in Linux and something about when you might want to use these programs. So this is a program that I wrote, and 99.9% of the software here was not written by me. Maybe 4 or 5 programs were. And this is a program called FL MoxGen. And for people who wish to build a Moxon rectangle antenna, you type in your frequency, the wire gauge, and hit calculate, and you will get the dimensions computed for you. And you can go into the file menu and either print this page so you can bring it to your garage and build the antenna, or you can create a file that is used in just a moment for antenna modeling. And that way you don't have to write that file and the tool will create it for you. The look and feel of this looks exactly like the look and feel of a similar Windows program, but the source code is entirely different. I wrote it from scratch. So this is a couple of windows of an antenna modeling program called XNEC2C. And I fed to the program the file that was created by FL MoxGen. And you can see in the 3 windows, in the right-hand window on top is a picture of the Moxon rectangle antenna with a vertical orientation. You can see the picture on the left is a picture that shows the radiation pattern at whatever frequency the tool is looking at. And then down below, you can see where it does front to back gain, SWR predictions, and so forth. And this is the kind of information that this program will give you. You can model any kind of antenna that in there that you want, as long as you know how to describe it. That's beyond the scope of this talk, but the software is there for you to do just this sort of thing. So for Morse code and for fox hunting, there's a couple of programs in there. For people who haven't learned Morse code yet or wish to practice it, there's a program that will give you 5-letter groups. You'll hear it in your headphones, you'll write it on paper, and you'll compare it to what the program is telling you. And you can set all manner of parameters to get the CW sounding the way you'd like. There's also a program in here called Microfox Config, and it's a program that I wrote for configuring the Microfox device that Bionics sells, and it's a 15 milliwatt transmitter on 2 meters. And if you plug it into USB and fire up this program, you can change the parameters for what it transmits and how often it transmits it and so forth. So you can hide a fox and your friends will hopefully find it. This GUI also looks very similar to a GUI for the Windows program, but again, the source code is entirely a clean room application. So next in the menu, we go down to digital modes, and you'll see there's an awful lot of programs that I put in the digital modes category. And again, I'm not going to go through them all, though they might be familiar to you because some of these run on multiple operating systems, such as FL Digi, for example, and what I rather affectionately call the FL family of programs that Dave W1HKJ has written. FL Arc, Digi, FL Message, FL Wrap, and so forth are all in here, as well as many others. For people who like to use FT8, there's the WSJTX program, which I know runs on multiple operating systems. There's programs in there for Echolink, for SSTV, and FreeDV, which is a free software voice codec that I'll be talking about a little bit later. So this screen might look familiar to people who are familiar with FT8. This is the WSJTX software written by Joe Taylor and company, and you'll recognize the waterfall and the decoding of messages and whatnot. I believe this looks the same across the multiple operating systems. So if you've run it before, it's no different on Linux. So Grid Tracker, I don't know how many people are familiar with this software. I think it's a most excellent piece of software, and the folks who wrote it are to be applauded for their efforts. However, Grid Tracker is not installed by default on version 25. I created a how-to Grid Tracker document to guide you through its installation, but I will be including this software in the next release of Andy's Ham Radio Linux. And so look forward to it when that comes out in who knows when I'll do that, anywhere from 1 to 3 months from now, perhaps. And so I strongly encourage you to install it. It's got some really beautiful maps in there. If you wish to track what grids you've contacted, which grids have been QSL'd and so forth. And it doesn't have to just be for Fred Fish and 6 meters. You might track grids for any number of reasons. And you can do that with the grid tracker software. And you can do a lot more with it as well. I'm just scratching the surface as to what's possible here. But it does talk to WSJTX directly, so your map will be up to date, and it will show dotted lines, if you wish it to, between stations that your radio can hear. So you'll get a feel of who's communicating with whom, and that will give you some idea as to where the band openings might be. And you can configure Grid Tracker to send your logs directly to Logbook of the World or several other logging sites. And that's all inside of the configuration of the program. So here's a map of my grid tracker setup, and you can see all of the red boxes are areas that I've contacted in QSL. You can see the day-night line. If you look carefully and squint a little, you can see the green line from USA to Europe, where a couple of stations are communicating. And then on the right, you can see an array of 5x5 boxes, which are all, you'll click them to get different functions of the software. The window on the bottom is a filtered view of all of the call signs that it can hear. And I chose to filter on calls that are calling, people that are calling CQ and whose grids I need. And those are highlighted in that color there, the solid color. Stations where I've gotten the grid but not QSL'd them, it's in the bottom one there. The third entry shows that, where the grid is highlighted a little bit in color and a little bit in black. So this software is highly configurable. It's great stuff, and it even will show you, based on communicating with a PSK reporter, which band has the most activity on FT8. So another part of this hobby that I wish more people participated in is things related to electronic design. I love doing hardware hacking and tinkering. I'm very adept with a soldering iron. I like to build the kits. I've not done schematic entry in probably 30 years, but there are tools to do that. I've done some Arduino programming. People who may not know, the Arduino is a small circuit board that you can program to do all manner of things beyond switches, blinky lights, and so forth. And people who are familiar with the micro BitX radios from India, those have an Arduino inside. And I did some major league hacking on that software when I got my hands on one of those and had a great deal of fun. But there are other programs in there related to electronic design. The Coil 64 program lets you compute a coil size and number of windings to get X number of microhenries out of your coil. There's the GNU Spice program is in there. Spice modeling of analog circuits has been around for decades. KiCad for schematics. There's programs to aid you in identifying resistors, Smith charts, and whatnot. So here's the Arduino GUI, and this is a program that I wrote for the very first Dr. Arduino board that came out. We had a kit build in my basement, and 6 or 7 of my ham friends were here, and some of them, after building the kit, couldn't make it work. So I wrote a diagnostic that checked everything on the board and helped us isolate areas where there might have been solder bridges and other such things. And so this is just a simple example of the kinds of things you can do with Arduino. And this, I'm pretty sure, runs on multiple operating systems. So this is the Coil 64 program that I recently discovered. Feed it information about how you'd like to wind your coil, the desired inductance, the size of the coil form, and so forth. And it'll give you an idea of how many turns of wire you need, given the gauge of the wire and so forth. And it comes out pretty close. I mean, anybody who's hand wound inductors knows that you're going to be off by a turn or two, especially when you put it in the circuit, but it gets you pretty close. And of course, KiCad for schematic entry. I'm not quite sure what this schematic is, but there's a tool there to do it. And of course, many people are drawing schematics and creating kits and having boards fabricated and so forth. And all of this software should be able to facilitate those activities. So the next menu has a bunch of selections related to HF propagation. And of course, PSK Reporter is available. I guess most people would know about that on the internet. You can get some solar data. There's a link to the VOA CAP program, which will predict propagation paths and so forth. And let me just go through a couple of those real quick. So the solar.gif file, you might recognize that. You've probably seen it on many people's websites, and I have permission from the author to make a link to it here so that you can see what propagation conditions look like. Or if you want to find out the distance between 2 grids, there's a program here that will do that, feed in the grids, and it'll tell you the distance and the azimuth and so forth. So you'll have some idea of where to aim your antenna if you have an antenna that can be aimed. The VOA CAP program I rather like. It's a website. It's not a program running on Linux, but I put a link into it for your convenience. And if you pick 2 points on the map on the right and tell it something about your mode and your power and your antennas, then on the left, it will show you a diagram that predicts the time of day and the likelihood of making a contact at on that particular band. And of course, it is a prediction, so it isn't always precisely correct, but I found that it trends in the right direction. So this is a program that I did not write originally, but I took it over from the original author and I maintain it now. It's a relatively simple logging program called Xlog. And as far as I know, it only runs on Linux. It's intended for more casual operators who want to take their time and log the contacts and all that. Yes, I have used it at field day. Yes, I have used it at 13 colonies representing Massachusetts. But unless you know the keyboard shortcuts and so forth, it really wasn't intended for that purpose, but can be used for that. And as you can see, it's got your standard fields of the date and the UTC, the call sign band, and so forth. It saves it in a flat text file. That's how it works, but you can export ADIF and other things with it. And I do that and upload it to Logbook of the World all the time without any problems at all. Most of the effort that I've put into updating the software is to track changes in the ADIF specification. So this is a logger that's there if you wish to use it. There's another more sophisticated logger in there called CQR log. And this one is intended for contesters who want more information. This will connect to various websites and download some of that information for you on the fly, whereas Xlog won't. And so there's at least a couple of loggers in here that are designed to meet different needs for people using the radio. The next menu I put in is for emergency management folks using the NBeams software suite. And I don't think I have all of the pieces of NBeams in that menu, but I believe they are all installed. And so I did that for folks to make it easier for them if they're involved in an emergency communication situation. So FLDigi and FLMessage we may have heard of. Sylpheed is an email tool that integrates with all of those and is useful in that situation. And there are other programs that are part of NBeams. You'd probably have to go to the digital modes menu to find them. In addition to that, there are some programs for rig control. Chirp is a nice program for programming your HT and your mobile rigs. FL Rig and G Rig are rig control programs that you can use on your computer. And WF View is a relatively new one that I found that's very good at talking to more recent models of ICOM rigs. And I thought I had a screenshot of that. Oh, I do. There we go. So here's a screenshot of WF View. You can see the controls at the bottom and the waterfall and so forth. This was talking to either my 7300 or my 7610. I don't remember what I was doing that day, but it's a very handy program for that. I don't know if remote support is there or if it's planned. So that would be one thing to check because many people are interested in doing that these days. But it's a nice program. The gentleman has been working hard on it, and it's available on here for you to use. Some folks are interested in playing with the satellites, and there are some out there. I built myself a homemade azimuth elevation rotator with a Kent Britain cheap Yagi being moved around. And my problem at home is I have too many trees with leaves and it blocks the signal. And in the winter, it's often quite chilly to get out there, even when the leaves are down. But for the times I do get out there, this program comes in handy. You'll notice that there are many satellites listed, and they're in the tabs of the interface, and you can get it to get telemetry information from those satellites. I believe there's a way to send that information to AMSAT so that they know the health of the satellites and so forth. And this program's out there in case you wish to use it. I happen to like this program. It's called gPredict, and you can tell it your home location. And once you download the updated information for where the satellites are, the TLE files as they're called, you can tell it which satellites to display on the map, and it will show you the footprint of that satellite. With other menu selections, it will show you the ground track of that satellite and give you a prediction of when it will be overhead. And it's pretty darn close. Within a few seconds. And that way you'll know when the satellites are coming and you can decide to be available for that. It will tell you the maximum elevation at your site. So if you have lots of trees, you might want to wait till the satellites, I don't know, 45 degrees up or higher. Or directly overhead. If it's just 20 degrees above the horizon, you might not be able to get it at your location with trees and terrain and so forth. But all of that information is available in here. It also has ways to talk to azimuth elevation rotators. And I got it to talk to my simple homebrew one. And it also has ways to talk to your rig to deal with frequency shifts related to Doppler and that sort of thing. Nice piece of software. Now, here's a piece of software that's highly complex, and I hope I can do it justice with my explanation. It's called GNU Radio Companion. And if you wish to describe a digital signal processing algorithm, you can do so with this program. It doesn't have to be just software defined radio. It could be any digital signal processing algorithm. And you do it by drawing blocks in the graphical interface and connecting them with lines. And the blocks would be things like a filter or an audio output or a block representing some SDR device that's an input or any of many other things could be used there. So you draw this high-level block diagram of your signal processing application, and when you push the go button, GNU Radio Companion will write a whole bunch of Python code, and then it will execute it for you. And this program supports many SDR devices, such as the very inexpensive RTL SDR dongles. I think they're about 20 bucks or so. It supports Hack RF and many other devices. There's lots of tutorials online for this. And if you're interested, I would encourage you to try it out. And here's an example of what I did based on a tutorial. So this may be an eye chart. You might want to download the PDF file of the slides to see it in more detail, but this is a block diagram of an FM radio receiver. It'll receive the FM broadcast band and it will decode it and play it through your speakers. And you can see on the left, there's an RTL SDR block that represents that piece of hardware with a low pass filter, the wideband FM decoder, and some other things that do some math on the volume and whatnot. And then the audio sync, which is your speaker. And each of those boxes, you can right click them and configure the parameters associated with that box. And when you push the go button, which is the green triangle up top in the middle, if there are no syntactical errors, no drawing errors, it will run the code and you will see, in this case, a screen that looks like this. So you can see where it says station, the second one down, where I put 3 or 4 local radio stations in a drop-down menu. And so this one is WCRB, which is 99.5 on the FM dial. And you can see in the middle, the yellow and red squiggles on the waterfall. And you can also see the rectangular digital sidebands that go with that station. And so you can see that it's tuned in well. You can see that it's a pretty strong station from the bottom display, and it comes through quite nicely with an appropriate antenna hooked up to the RTL SDR dongle. So another program related to SDRs is called GQRX, and I know that it works with the RTL SDR dongle and probably others. And you may recognize that frequency as the NOAA weather radio. And again, hooked up to an appropriate antenna and tuned, you can pull that in. On the right, you tell it what mode of transmission you're trying to decode and some other parameters, and it will just decode it on the fly once you hit there's a button up there, that button just underneath file. Click that and you're off and running. And again, you can see the waterfall of nearby stations and get a feel for which station is stronger, because there are several of those NOAA weather stations. Your local area, one might be stronger than this one, but that's how you can see what's what. And here's a program that I just discovered. I've not actually had a chance to play with this program. It's called SDR Angel, and it looks to be highly configurable with all sorts of different blocks that you can put on the screen to describe the signal processing and SDR kind of thing that you wish to do. I'm afraid I can't say any more about it than that because I've not played with it, but it does support the M17 vocoder that is being developed, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So before I go into what's new and cool, let me take a breath for a second in case you feel like you've been drinking from the fire hose. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions for me before I move on. Okay, hearing none, perhaps we can take them after we shut off the recording. So what do I think is new and cool in the Linux world of ham radio? Well, there's the free digital voice effort that isn't new, but is still ongoing. And this is work by David Rowe, Victor Kilo 5 Delta Golf Romeo down in Australia. And he calls it Codec 2. And it's a way of encoding and decoding a voice digitally. And it was designed to be used on HF, and it was designed to understand how HF propagates, and so that when the signal path degrades, that the algorithm for the voice would degrade a bit more gracefully, as opposed to, when you tune your HD TV, you either get the station or you don't. It just falls off the edge. And if we're tuning an analog signal, we're used to, okay, we're going to pick up a lot of static and the voice will be harder to hear, but there's still something there that we can potentially latch onto. And that was what at least part of the effort was for Codec 2, is to make it fail a little bit more gracefully. And also a lot of work was done to make the bit rates lower and still get something that was comprehensible. And so a lot of work has been done there. And the folks on the M17 project, which is a fairly relatively new project, they're writing low-level protocols that employ the code for codec 2, and soon there will be applications that use those protocols to allow people to do digital data and digital voice in a free software way, not a proprietary way. There is a particular model of HT, I believe it's the TYT 380, where there are instructions how to do a hardware hack on it and load a new firmware into it and make it into an HT that can transmit your voice using this M17 protocol. Um, the SDR Angel program has a demodulator for M17. And so if you have a friend that has such an HT, you could at least hear what they're doing and do some experimenting here. The M17 folks are big on experimenting, on openness, on tinkering. Gee, don't all those sound like things that helped us get started in this hobby? I think they do. And so I would encourage you to go over to m17project.org and see what they're up to. And maybe some of these things will be of interest to you. You might want to download it and give it a try. So at a high level, I've been keeping track of the number of downloads of Andy's Ham Radio Linux over the years, more for curiosity than anything. And you see it started in the very beginning, the numbers were quite low, not too many people knew about it. And as things matured and as the word got out there over many years, you'll see the number of downloads got quite high. In fact, for one version, it was up over 14,000 downloads, with a few subversions of that included in that number. The far right column is version 25, which was released in June, and that slide is already out of date. We're up to about 27 or almost 2,800 downloads with that version, and going quite strongly. It's averaging about 120 or so downloads a week, and going very well from people all over the world who are interested in running Linux and the ham radio applications that come with it. So I was very pleased and actually quite surprised when SourceForge sent me an email back in March of 2022 informing me that the Andy's Ham Radio Linux software collection had been downloaded 100,000 times. I had no clue. I really truly had no clue. I was really quite blown away by that. So I want to thank the 5 people who persisted in downloading it despite all those failures. And the other folks that succeeded, I'm happy that you did. And so thank you very much for all of the support and the downloads and at least trying it. I hope most of you liked it, but I imagine some of you might not have, and that's okay. I give you credit for at least downloading it and trying it out. And the local section here, the local ARRL section in Eastern Massachusetts, wrote a brief article about that, and I've put the URL on this slide. So sourceforge.net is where this software is distributed. It's where the documentation lives. And there's also a little bit of a chat forum there where people can ask technical support questions and post problems. And I'm asking people to only post problems related to things like installing this or other things that I have control over. If you're running program XYZ and it doesn't work for you, the better bet is to go to Program XYZ's website and look there for documentation and the folks who are more expert at that program. I might be able to help you, and if I can, I will, but I don't know every program in intimate detail. So I would say go to the website of the authors and those who support the program. I think you'll have a better chance of getting help there. On sourceforge.net, if you search for my call sign, not only will you find Andy's Ham Radio Linux, but you'll find some other pieces of software that I chose to share with the community, all under the GNU General Public License. As I mentioned, when I was playing with MicroBitX, I had, I believe it was a version 3 board. They're up to version 6 as of now. And I modified it for use by blind amateur radio operators. I put a voice chip in it. I made it such that you didn't need to be able to see the 2-line LCD display. I had a local blind ham kickstart, or not kickstart it, but he kicked a local, I'm sorry, I'm not saying it right. I built a prototype of it and I brought it to his house and he tried it out. And so he was very happy with what he saw and gave me some pointers as to how to make it more accessible to blind hams. I built two of them. One of them works perfectly. One's a little flaky for some reason. And it didn't go any further than that once I posted the code. But I had a heck of a good time going through the effort. I learned a lot about what does it really mean to have multiple VFOs and things of that nature. It's just a software thing. And so I learned a lot about that. And so that was a very productive project for me. And maybe one of these days I'll take one of the units that I built that works and give it to a blind ham and see what they think of it. There's a couple of configuration programs for devices sold by Bionics, namely the MicroFox and the TinyTrack. And I want to thank those folks for giving me the information of what bytes to send into the device and what bytes can I expect coming out. Most vendors won't do that, so I'm thankful to Bionics for doing that. Another vendor that was very helpful that way was Rig Expert. I asked them the same question years ago when I had their AA, I believe it was the 520 device. I said, can you please tell me how I can get the information out of it? And not only did they tell me, they posted it on their website for everyone to have. And I don't know the details of their internal firmware, but I do know the external interface. And I wrote a program in Linux for people to get that data. And then Dave, W1HKJ, took that and wrapped a GUI around it, and he calls it FLAA for AA Analyzer. And so that's out there. And one last program that I want to mention is called Wordsworth. And my club president, George, Kilo 1 India Golf, I'm not sure. I think he won a cover plaque award for this with QST, but I'm not sure. But he describes a way to learn Morse code a word at a time. And I collaborated with him and wrote a couple of programs to give people some text that would get converted into Morse code that they could listen to facilitate their learning with this method. It's very different from the hear a letter, type a letter way that many people were taught Morse code. And when Morse code was sent that way during the war and it was encoded, you had to do it that way. But if we're sending English language words, if we can teach ourselves to hear the words one at a time, we can probably understand the conversation without writing it down and perhaps be able to go at a faster speed. So there's some documentation and some programmings around Wordsworth. So this is the last slide of the evening. If people have questions, I would be happy to take them. I have sent the PDF copies of the slides to you folks for posting on an appropriate website. If folks have questions after this, please contact me. My email is Kilo Bravo 1 Oscar India Quebec at ARRL.net. And I'm also good on QRZ in case that email ever changes. So please don't hesitate to contact me. And I want to thank you for listening to this presentation. And whatever you do in the hobby, I hope you have a lot of fun doing it.